Welcome to the Everyday Ministry Podcast, where ministers get together to discuss everyday ministry.
This is James, and I'm sitting here with Garrett Kell. Well, I'm not sitting with him, actually. We're on a video call, and he's all the way in Virginia, and I'm over here in Alabama, so I appreciate technology for sure. But Garrett, if you would, just go take a minute and just introduce yourself as we get into the podcast.
Yeah, James, thanks for having me on. My name's Garrett Kell, and got one wife. Her name's Carrie. We've been married for 10 years now, and we have five kiddos. They're from 9 down to about 15 months. So our house is kind of crazy. We've got a few other people who live in our house with us from the church, and then we've got 2 dogs and a hermit crab. So it's always rowdy at our casa, and we call it Kell Motel sometimes. But
you have to tell me what the hermit crab's name is.
We haven't really named him yet, but I'm not sure. He won't die. We're not trying to kill him, but when we bought him at the beach, the kids were like, yeah, we want this. And they're like, listen, this thing usually lives about 3 or 4 days, maybe 2 weeks. So we figured, all right, we'll take him home. And he just, I guess he's Mayweather, he just will never retire. He's just hanging on. We've got him, and we live in Alexandria, Virginia, right across the river from Washington, D.C. And we've been up here for about 6 years now.
Okay. Awesome, man. As we get into the podcast, this question I always ask everyone, and so I'm going to ask you as well, is how would you define an everyday minister?
Yeah, I think, I want to define it broadly first for every Christian, right? So anybody who's a Christian is somebody who's been called out of sin and into Christ. And one of the great blessings of being a child of God is that we want to tell as many people as we can about our Father. And so I think every Christian in one sense is an everyday minister, that knowing that the Lord's placed them exactly where they are in the family they're in the neighborhood they're in the community they're in the workplace, there to make Jesus known through words and through actions that would make those words make sense, as it were. If we're going to be more specific about pastors, I think an everyday minister is someone who never forgets that they're first a sheep. Shepherds are always sheep first. And I think anytime we forget that we need to be led by the good shepherd to green pastures and still waters for him to revive our soul, I think we get in danger. So an everyday minister, I think, is one who ministers out of the grace that they receive every single day from the Lord. And, I tell our church here all the time that I'm really no different than them. My gift just puts me up front. So when I'm preaching for me too. When I'm studying for me. And I give it to them along with our other elders, but we're just Christians, and we love Jesus and we follow him. And I think an everyday minister just never forgets who they are, that they're blood-bought sinners who have been given grace by the King of Glory. So,
well, that's what I love about this question, and kind of the idea of our podcast is really focusing on pastors of all sorts, elders that serve in the church. But what I love about the idea of a minister is it's everyone, like you started off with. Everyone that's come to Christ and salvation is called to be a minister. Ephesians 4:11 and 12 right there, telling the pastor's job is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. So it's all of us. So awesome, man. Excited about having you on here. In a little bit, we'll get to the topic of some of the articles you write. I've read a few of them, and there's 2 that really stood out to me. But before we get into that, let's talk about just your educational background, and then we'll jump into how you ended up where you are today as the pastor there.
Yeah, educational background. I grew up in West Virginia, so grew up tipping cows and all that kind of stuff. And went to Berkeley Springs High School, graduated there in 96. So many moons ago. Then went to Virginia Tech, where I studied beer for the first 3 years of my time in college. And that's where I became a Christian, middle of my junior year. got converted radically through God's tremendous mercy and the witness of a friend. And that was kind of the line in the sand my junior year there. Graduated in 2000 with a degree in marketing. And I was in trouble because my whole plan through college had been to start a nightclub in the islands because I liked partying and I liked the beach. And I thought, what's better than a party at the beach? So I was going to start a nightclub in the islands. And then I got converted and I was in trouble. I had no idea what I was going to do. And the Lord in his mercy opened the door for me to go down to Denton, Texas, where I studied under a pastor named Tommy Nelson, who basically I had never met a man who knew the Bible like him. And after hanging out with him and asking him some questions, that he always answered with scripture, not with I think this or I think that. And he always had Bible verses. And so I went down there and went through his discipleship program, something called Young Guns. I went through that 3 times. During that time, I also started attending Dallas Theological Seminary, which is where I got a THM in New Testament and pastoral ministries, and I graduated from there in 2006. That's kind of my educational background.
Okay, awesome. So what's the name of the church you serve at? And just kind of give us the story of how you ended up there, and just kind of tell us a little about the church as well.
Sure, yeah. So I'm one of the pastors here at Delray Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia. Before I got here, I was a pastor of a church called Graham Bible Church in Graham, Texas. Graham's a 9,000 person little town. So
I live in a town of 2,000. So think about what that is.
I love it, man. I love it. It's a different world, but so I pastored there for 7.5 years. I planted there out of Denton Bible Church and with a group of other people, and pastored there for 7.5 years and had some wonderful years, some hard years. And but the Lord really used that time. I became a Christian when I was 21, pastor when I was 25. And during my 7.5 years there at Graham Bible Church, I always longed for a season of sitting under an older, wiser pastor. And the Lord in his providence opened the door for me to strike up a friendship with Mark Dever, who's a pastor in Washington, D.C. at a church called Capitol Hill Baptist Church. So he had an internship that when I learned a little bit more about it, some people leave to go do a PhD. I'm not a PhD kind of guy. So I kind of consider it my practical PhD. So we found a faithful shepherd to take my spot there in Graham. And I came up here to DC, did the 6-month internship, got Baptist brainwashed, and then went to here to Delray Baptist Church in 2012. We were either going to go to Dubai and plant a church with some friends, or come to Delray, which was actually strikingly similar in regards to the community. The number of unreached people groups here in our area is really remarkable. And second largest Afghan population in the nation is here, and lots of opportunity to reach the nations from here. So got here in 2012. Delray Baptist was started in 1897, and it kind of was a flagship Southern Baptist in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and then dwindled down to basically died off in the mid 2000s. And a faithful everyday minister named Paul Douglas came in. He's an Army chaplain, and he held down the fort here for a couple of years and reached out to Capitol Hill Baptist, and they sent one of their elders over, and a couple members came, and they called me in 2012. When I got here, there were about 30 people or so in the church. And I've been here for 5 years, and it's been sweet to watch the Lord work. Today I have a wonderful team of elders. Love the guys. I mean, they're some of my best friends on the planet. We have great unity just by God's grace, and help each other, encourage each other. And God's doing good work here. And in a place that certainly needs the gospel, as everywhere does.
That's right. So are y'all able to reach out to a lot of the people groups there in Delray? Yeah,
we certainly try. It's a slow ministry. There's a lot of it's very relational. Most of the people groups here come from Muslim backgrounds, so God has to radically change hearts. But we've seen quite a number of good, deep relationships forming with some of the peoples. We have several members in our congregation who are uniquely gifted to reach out to people from Muslim backgrounds, and they do a good job of connecting the rest of our church with those relationships. So it's been sweet to watch the Lord work, brother. It's been really, really cool. So do pray. If you hear this, please pray. You know, we see Muslims regularly having visions about Jesus, and they want to know who this Jesus is, but they have to do it very Nicodemus-like. It's not something they can do publicly. So be praying, because Satan doesn't like to see them turn to the light, for sure.
Man, I had a good friend of mine this summer had the opportunity to go to Turkey about a month, and that's where he feels called to Muslims, to minister to Muslims, and that's he was telling us of stories that we in America don't hear a lot of them, of Muslims coming to faith, because it is, I don't know, it's kind of a hush hush thing, I guess, but they just don't talk about it a lot over here. And he said the same thing. People have visions of Christ, and it's just amazing to see how God works in a lot of different ways from the gospel, man. And so,
one interesting thing about that I've noticed with the vision thing. In the visions, they never share the gospel. Whether it be an angel that they see or Christ himself, they never share the gospel in the visions. They always say, go find a follower of the way, or go read the book. And it's always pointing out to an evangelist. God always uses his people to get the gospel. Everyday people get the gospel to people who are lost. I just always found that striking about the visions, because God could just say, boom, here's the gospel, believe this, and just convert them. But he seems to delight in his people telling others about Jesus. Well,
when he was telling me about it, a lot of times it was after the fact that they would hear the gospel, they would have these visions.
Yep, that's true.
We were reminded of the gospel. So yeah, that is awesome how it works. But man, I found out about you. I read, the first article, the guy on here named Daniel, he's another co-host on here. He pointed out, he'd send the article to me, Stop Photobombing Jesus. And really that's what kind of got us wanting to get you on here. But before that, I read another one by you, and I didn't even realize that was by you whenever he sent that. And it was each of the book of the Bible in one word or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And I really enjoyed that one as well. But he was supposed to be on here with me, but we couldn't make scheduling work. So I really wanted just to take a minute and talk about your writing. I know you write for some different ministries and things online. So if you could just take a minute and just tell us about your writing, and then second, we'll talk about that article specifically.
So writing is something that I never thought about doing, to be honest with you. Had never really done much of. I used to write a little blurb for a fantasy football league that I was in. I give a recap every week, and people loved it. So that was fun to do. But when I did the internship with Mark Dever, he pulled me aside and encouraged me to write. He said, "You're a good preacher." He said, "But God seems to have gifted you as a writer, and you should think about writing more." And I kind of blew it off at the time. But the Lord has, some of the things he seems to be blessing. So I do a little writing, just on my own blog is something, we call it, All Things for Good. I don't post a lot. I don't have time to post a lot, but I don't, All Things for Good is mine. Then I do some writing for 9 Marks. Some stuff shows up on the Gospel Coalition, a couple times on Desiring God, and then, Jared Wilson's deal, down at, Midwestern for the church. So, those are a couple things that some of my stuff is wound up on.
I don't know how he writes so much.
I don't either. Like him and Kevin DeYoung, they sneeze and out comes a book or a blog post. Whatever that is, I don't have that. Yeah. So I'm no writing expert. That's for sure.
Last year he wrote like 6 books.
Yeah.
I was like, how do you even find time to do this? Like,
yeah. Well, God didn't call me to that. So I'm glad he can write them. And, some of them, I've read a couple of them, and praise God, they're good. But that ain't me for sure. But I am thankful for brothers like that, and brothers and sisters like that who are gifted, obviously.
One reason I wanted to talk about this specific article, Stop Photobombing Jesus, is because really with a lot of the people we have listening, and kind of the ones we want to reach to, is those pastors that they may never be heard of by anybody outside of their congregation. And I think especially young guys out there, I think we kind of struggle with what I think you allude to in your article there is trying to get the glory for ourselves at times and things of that nature. So if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit of the stories that you write about in the blog itself. Just talk a little bit about it. And we're going to encourage everybody listening to go and read it for themselves. So you can just give a quick overview of it if you want, or have
Sure.
that.
Yeah. After I became a Christian, I have kind of what some people think is like a radical testimony. So I got opportunities to share it. And then I moved quite a bit. And then I moved to Texas and to do that deal with Tommy Nelson that I told you about. And while I was there, we were supposed to pick a ministry to serve in. And went to do the college ministry. And there was a guy named John Bryson, who's one of the Acts 29 board members. He was the college minister there at the time. And he could kind of tell that I just needed I needed a couple lessons, basically in humility. And he said, "Hey, I've got an opportunity for you at our big gathering coming up. So be ready." And I was like, all right. So I'm assuming he's going to call me out to preach or share my testimony or something like that. So I was ready, showed up, and rather than leading me on stage, he led me backstage, and he showed me the rope to the curtain, and he said, "This is what we need you to do. We need you to serve the people who are on stage tonight by opening and closing the curtain for them." And then he, just gave me an attaboy and walked away. And and brother, every bit of the pride that was in my heart just came out. I mean, I could feel criticizing every person who was on stage. I'd be looking out at the eyes of the people who were looking at the people on stage, just thinking, man, if I was out there, people get saved, God would do this, God would do that. And I haven't had any emails from Jesus or him talking to me audibly, but it was as if he said, if you can't be as joyful back here serving me where nobody can see you, mm-hmm. as you would be out there where everybody can see you, then you're seeking your glory and not my own. And that was one of the many moments in my life that I can look back to that the Lord has interrupted my idolatry of me wanting to be something, mm-hmm. and reminding me that John the Baptist had it right. That I'm not the Christ, and mm-hmm. the best thing I can do is to decrease so that he can increase. So the post is just a little bit of a reflection on that. Photobombing, you jump into the picture, you want a little glory. You don't want to be all the way in the front, but you want to kind of peek in the back. So when people look at it, they'll remember you were there and all that kind of stuff. And I think anybody who's a pastor or anybody who's really wants to be useful in their life is going to struggle with this in some way, shape, or form. Because we want to be useful. God's created us to be. And but I think our sinful nature is going to want to grab at some glory and steal it from him.
Well, that's what I enjoyed so much about the articles, because how real it is. Because like you're saying, everybody deals with that to some extent. And so I find it so relevant. I mean, even in, think about a kid. When a kid is playing ball or something like that, they want everybody to look at them. Where I remember playing Little League baseball, and I would daydream about catching that pop fly that goes over the fence.
Yes.
I mean, everybody wants a little bit of that, and
everybody does.
And it doesn't change when you become a pastor or a minister or serving the Lord. It's something you always deal with. And so I love the article, man. But I actually find this next question I'm going to ask you so relevant because you said that you never saw yourself writing or anything like that. But if there's anybody listening and they kind of want to start writing, maybe something for their congregation or in general, what's some advice you would give?
So two things that I try to kind of, I think the most basic thing is write what you love. I mean, that sounds pretty cliche, but I think it's really true. There's lots of stuff. I've had people ask me to write stuff. I don't do well at trying to write somebody else's stuff. Yeah. I don't know. I'm just not wired that way. Some people are just writers. I'm just a guy who's trying to figure out how to tell other people about Jesus, both Christians and non-Christians. So there's particular veins, and those usually flow out of either wounds or areas of brokenness or areas of deep passion or experiences that have marked me. So for me personally, that's kind of my, if you will, sweet spot, is figuring out ways that God has, in his mercy, struck me very often and helped me to see areas of sin that need to die. So I think I always want to try and figure out what a sweet spot looks like for you. What is it that you love to talk about? What do you feel like God has gifted you with, and work in that vein? Just be content to be who God's made you, not trying to be somebody else. You know, I can't tell stories like Chuck Swindoll, and I can't, I can't write like C.S. Lewis. I can't do that. I don't need to. And that's where you just got to get to the point where you're like, I don't need to be anybody else. God made me to be who I am. So for me, I want to try and write that way, write what I love. And then secondly, I want to figure out who I'm writing for. So me, most normally, if I write something, I want it to be useful for our church. So as a pastor, my primary audience most normally is our church. So I'm kind of working on a book right now where, people are like, oh, who's your publisher? I'm like, I'm not even thinking about a publisher. I'm thinking about my church. I want to write this. I want to sit down with people from our church, read it together, talk about how can this be useful for them? Because if nobody else ever reads it, I want our congregation to be challenged and helped by it. So you got to just figure out what those are some things that kind of motivate me. So what I love, and then our church.
Man, what I love about, especially the idea of it kind of transfers. I'm going to ask you a question about what would you say to pastors, but I think about somebody's preaching as they're developing their style of preaching. I've heard so many people give the advice of watch your favorite pastor and then try to imitate that. And that's one of the worst advice I've ever got in my life. And for a long time, I couldn't preach good I'm not good now, but I couldn't preach as good as I could have because I was trying to be somebody else.
Yeah. Brother, that's I appreciate you saying that. I've never heard you preach, so I can't say if you're a liar or not. But I think if you preach with that kind of heart, though, an honest heart, you don't need to be whatever a great preacher. I don't even know what a great preacher is, right? So this is where I think the social media age and the podcast and the vodcast or whatever's going on now, like I just don't know. It certainly has its benefits, but it also can create some real insecurities and idolatries in our hearts that I think are dangerous. So the best. I mean, Chuck Swindoll. I asked him one time, what would you say to somebody about being, somebody who's a young preacher? He said, just be yourself. And certainly I think if you ever listen to Tom Nelson or Mark Dever preach, you would probably hear some of that in me, because it's okay to be influenced by people, but I am not either one of those guys and they're not me. And that's fine. So I would say you're 100% right on that, bro.
So the next thing I was going to ask was, I know you've been at your church only 5 years now, so and you just spoke at the first 5-year conference not too long ago. So you can address somebody that may be the first 5 years of the church or just a pastor in general. But what advice would you give them?
I think, Spurgeon said that nearness to Jesus produces, and I forget the order always, but holiness, humility and happiness. And I think for a young pastor, my advice would be love God, read the Bible a lot, know the Bible, man, know it inside and out. Like read books, outline books, master books of the Bible, let them master you. Always be reading for yourself first. Like when you're studying, don't study just to like, how are they going to hear this, or how, like, let it mine for your own soul first. Never forget you're a sheep before a shepherd. So those are some of the love, like your devotions with the Lord. And I'm not talking about just your daily quiet time. I'm talking about do what warms your affection. Mm-hmm. Guard your heart from the hypocrisy of hidden sin. I wrote another post just a couple of days ago that was on TGC. It's called I was a pastor hooked on porn. And basically it tells the story of 10 years ago in the middle of my time of pastoring there in Graham, about a secret sin that I had hidden, that I was scared, man. I hated sin. I loved Jesus. I thought I'd never do it again. I got in this cycle of just pretending and covering up. And I think there is nothing more important than your love for God. And so early on, I would say, love God by confessing deeply, truly, honestly, all your sin. Have somebody in your life that you can be transparent with, somebody who's got free reign. So I've got several guys in my life right now, plus my wife, who have at any time can ask me anything. And we have regular check-ins and all that kind of stuff. It's so good for my soul to not hide. And then just know your word, man. Read the word. Don't worry about reading blog posts and Twitter and whatever. Just read the Bible, man. Know the Bible. Know Genesis to Revelation. Know how the story goes. That was because that's what changes churches is the word. Right. I mean, if you preach the Bible, people come to life. God's word, God's Spirit uses his word, man. And I just say, don't try and be cute. Don't try and be gimmicky. Just preach the Bible, love people. Don't be a hypocrite, and hope for Jesus' second coming, and make every decision by faith, not fear, and have your heart set on that day when we'll stand before the Lord. And there's nothing, aha in there, but that's just what it's about. We never graduate from that stuff.
So you're telling me that a fog machine and an 8-piece band doesn't lead people to Christ?
I think it hinders it, brother. Yeah. I mean, it's distracting. And yeah, I mean, most of us with those kinds of things are goofy. I mean, and if you're listening and you're doing that, please stop. There's no sense in it. But, but there's all kinds of other things that we can do. As a young pastor, for instance, one of the ways I got in the way of the gospel was when I'd come to an uncomfortable moment in a sermon because something was weighty and convicting, I'd crack a joke. I'd try and lighten the mood. And I think I did a disservice to people's souls because I don't have any right to lighten the mood when God makes it heavy. So there's other ways that we can do the same sort of gimmicky stuff that may seem more innocent. So whether it be humor, and I mean, humor's fine as long as it's used rightly, right? But you can do that. You can build people too much into your personality, into your story. There's lots of little things like that I think are maybe just as dangerous because they seem acceptable that wouldn't be called out by our modern evangelicalism.
That's right. Well, is there anything you just want to add or say to the listeners, and then we'll get into the resources of the week? Man,
I got no brilliant prophecies or anything like that, but I just I trust that if you've made it this far in the podcast, then for some reason God wants you to have heard something that we talked about today. And I would just say, as with anything else, try and figure out what's something that the Lord has struck you with, and don't ignore that. I trust that in God's kind providence, He's allowed you to hear this, and particularly about the confessing of sin. Like I think we love the idol of image is so strong in our day, and that is really it tempts us to hide. So don't hide. Come out wherever you are. So
awesome. Well, I'll start with you. What is a plug of the week you have for us?
Do I get a plug or multiple plugs?
And you can give 50 or 5 or whatever you want to do. All
right. So first things first, the book that I'm always reading and rereading, I only have one besides the Bible, really. It's Pilgrims Progress by John Bunyan. So if you haven't read this, it's glorious. So it's not inspired. I don't think it should be in the Bible, but it's amazing.
I'll have to buy that one.
Okay, if you've never read John Bunyan, The Pilgrim's Progress, it is glorious. Desiring God's edition is excellent. It has John Newton's preface in it. You should. This is wonderful. It basically chronicles the story of a man named Christian who is called out by a guy named Evangelist out from the city of destruction to the celestial city. And it's his journey as a Christian through all of the highs and lows and troubles and all the characters. It's amazing. If you haven't read Pilgrim's Progress, you've got to do it. Aside from John Bunyan, I love J.C. Ryle. So J.C. Ryle, he's kind of I would envision him as like a MMA grandpa. Like, he's a sweet, gentle lion who just comes at you. So A Call to Prayer by J.C. Ryle is the book I hand out more as a pastor than any other book. It's 30 pages with no pictures, but 30 pages of soul-stirring glory that will make you pray. So one of my friends, Shai Lin, was our assistant pastor here for a couple of years. He put me onto this, and I have forever thanked him for it. So good luck finding it on Amazon, because every time it's there, I buy them out. So
get mad if I can't find it.
You'll find it somehow. So seek and ye shall find. It's in the Bible. And then Thoughts for Young Men by J.C. Ryle is also glorious. So
I've heard a lot of good things about that one for sure. Listen,
man, this is the book that every man and woman should have to read before they graduate high school or vote. This book is so good. So Thoughts for Young Men, J.C. Ryle. I'm reading that. I'm also reading his Duties for Parents right now. It's wonderful. Just a couple more. John Newton, Select Letters of John Newton. So John Newton was known for being a pastor of pastors. So Mark Dever, I don't know if you know much about him, but he's kind of a pastor of pastors. And he reminds me so much of John Newton in the way that anytime you meet somebody, somehow he's been touched by this brother. Well, John Newton did that. He wrote lots of little letters. They're short. They're great. A couple modern resources. Mack Stiles wrote a great book on evangelism.
I haven't read that one yet.
Evangelism is what it's called. So what's different about this book is it's not so much personal evangelism. It's the kind of evangelism that I alluded to earlier with the way that the church acts as the witness. So I bring a friend, I've been sharing the gospel with somebody, but now they're going to come to church and they're going to see this diverse group of people who have nothing in common except Jesus. How does that witness save people's souls? It's great. Mack Stiles, Evangelism. And then last thing, our interns are reading this. It's kind of one of the things they read to prep. It's a 3-part series by Joe Thorn. Do you know who Joe Thorn is?
Those books are amazing.
They are.
They're reading them.
They're great. I wrote a little review on this for TGC. And
that one, actually.
Did you? Okay. I don't know if anybody ever read those book reviews, but anyway, it was good for me to process. So basically, whenever I do a book review, what I do, and basically anytime I read a book, I get a copy, but then I get a couple more copies and I read it with somebody else. It's one of the best ways to disciple is just here, read this book. I'm going to read this. You read this too. We'll talk about it. That way you're not just reading by yourself. Anyway, The Heart of the Church, The Character of the Church, Life of the Church, Joe Thorn, super clear, concise. If you're not a Reformed Baptist, he'll make you a little uncomfortable sometimes, but that's good. We all need to be a little uncomfortable sometimes.
Well, his books, I know if you keep up with him, his good friend makes fun of him, calls them booklets or whatever. But I love those books because, like you said, they're simple. You can read a chapter in 10 minutes and get a lot out of it, but it's straight to the point. Unfortunately, that's the only one out of all of those that you just named that I've read. So I got about 5 books to buy, apparently. So,
well, man, you won't be sorry for any of those. I promise.
The other guy on the podcast named Corey, he's actually reading through the Evangelism now, I believe.
Good.
And then the first 8 weeks of the podcast, I think I referenced about 7 of the little 9 Marks books like that.
Yep.
And I remember, and I'll make this reference. I guess I'll plug it again as I've plugged it before. Is the little black one called "What Is the Gospel?"
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's been one of my favorite reads that I've ever read in my life. Just because how simply they articulate the gospel in that book.
Greg does a great job in that. His other one, Who is Jesus, is probably even better. It's really good if you haven't read it.
I ain't got a chance to read it either. That's a life of someone in seminary, I guess. Read a bunch of other stuff. So.
Well, somebody tells you what to read. I know. That's good. That's good.
Well, man, I've enjoyed the podcast. We don't have a lot of listeners, but man, it's been encouraging to me just sitting here having this conversation with you.
Me too.
But if you would, just tell us how we can, if anybody wants to follow you on Twitter and all that, how they can.
So I am on Facebook. My wife says I add just about anybody. So as long as I can tell you're not spam, I'll probably add you.
Well, that's probably true.
Well, there you go. So Twitter, let's see here. At Pastor J.G. Kell. So at Pastor JG Kell is my Twitter. I don't do Instagram. Yeah, so that's probably the best way to get me.
And what was your blog post again?
Blog address is allthingsforgood.org. I think we have .org, .com, .net, but that's just so, yeah, I think it all routes to the same place.
Awesome, man. Well, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed it.
If you're encouraged by what you hear, please go like our Facebook page, share the episodes, and rate the podcast on iTunes. Don't forget that a new episode drops every first and third Mondays. Our prayer is that these episodes are an encouragement to you and that you would be faithful in the ministry that God has placed you in.